Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with another track assembly tutorial video for the 1/35th scale Soviet B4 M1931 Howitzer track. The B4 Howitzer, it's a really cool piece, and what's interesting about it is that's one of the only non-self-propelled artillery pieces that's actually fully tracked. However, that's not really the topic of this video, and neither is this kit in question. Of course, on the ECA channel, I have a thorough review and build model showcase video for this exact same kit here, and I recommend checking it out. However, the reason why I'm mentioning it at this time is because I'm building this model, I need to go ahead and make a track link tutorial for the simple reason that this kit supplies you with a set of individual link and link tracks. As we know, this channel is not a fan of this stuff, and I will go on record and say these tracks are garbage and they are not going to be utilized on this build. But obviously, I need to have tracks on this model. So that leads us to the true subject matter of this video, which are the workable replacement track links here from friulmodel. If anyone's a fan of the channel, you'll know that this is not the first time I've done a review on friulmodel tracks, or is this even the first time I've mentioned friulmodel products in any of my videos. And for good reason. Friulmodel is probably, in my opinion, one of the best companies out there for workable track link solutions in 1/35th scale. In this video, we're going to be reviewing these tracks here, and I'm also going to be giving a quick tutorial on how to assemble them and fit them onto the model in question. So stay tuned, because there's going to be a bit of content coming right at you. So for those who are unaware, friulmodel is a company located out in Hungary, and they specialize in 1/35th scale metal workable track links. They're probably one of the oldest companies in the game and have been making workable track links in this media now since at least the mid-1990s, or at least that's when I first heard of them. Regardless, their tracks are considered some of the better ones. However, there are some pros and cons to working with friulmodel links that I'll go over momentarily. First, if anyone is interested in picking up these tracks, they can be found in a multitude of locations, mostly online. eBay does have several individuals that sell their tracks, but also I personally just like getting them directly from friulmodel themselves. Listed below in the video description, as well as you can probably see it popping up on the bottom of the screen, is the direct link to friulmodal's website. There they have the complete catalog, and you can just place your order on there. The thing is with friulmodal's catalog is that it's a bit archaic in a way with the way they do their shopping cart system. It's not like, you know, Amazon or basically any other e-tailer. You kind of have to follow a more breadcrumb type ordeal where you place the order and then the payment information is going to be done via the email, as opposed to just, you know, putting it into the website as you would again on something like eBay or Amazon. Regardless, the tracks are definitely worth the experience. The other thing about the tracks to mention is that they are made out of a white metal alloy, which is lead-based, and this is something that does have some pros and cons to it. Some of the pros is that it does add some nice weight to the model, which has it sit and settle down on its tracks, and also on a terrain type setting, much better compared to a plastic or a single piece vinyl counterpart. The other thing is that because of the mass, the tracks will have some excellent sag to them, which is a nice feature, specifically depending on the build you're working on, and this one here, that's going to be the case. But some of the downsides with working with lead is, first, you know, lead is kind of toxic, so you want to make sure that your tools and your workspace is a place where you're constantly keeping it clean, it's away from children, and it's also, you know, in a place where you're not going to handle food or anything along those lines. A lot of people out there like to build their models on kitchen tables. If that's the case, you're going to have to take some extra precautionary steps when working with these tracks. Something else to consider about these tracks, and this is specifically true for the budget-minded individual, is with the cost. These tracks here tend to be some of the more costly options out there on the market, specifically for a workable track link solution. On average, these tracks retail anywhere between $40 to $60 US, and this is with or without shipping factored in most cases. So if you're working on a model and you're working on a strict budget, these tracks here are going to be something that can inflate that probably double, because in most cases the price of the tracks are sometimes the same, if not more, than the cost of the model in question. So this is something that definitely needs to be factored in by the builder if they're contemplating with rolling with a set like this. Having said all that, in my opinion, these tracks are definitely worth it. Specifically, in most cases, why I have to go with these tracks is because the kit supply ones are just completely inadequate for the job at hand. So that is something that needs to be considered. Also, for the subject matter at hand, I'm not aware of any other company that produces tracks in a workable format for this pattern of vehicle. So at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, I should say, I believe that Fruity is the only game in town. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and actually start this video. So starting with the packaging, this is quite typical seen on the other Fruity tracks, where it comes in this, you know, pretty simple white box. Here we have this little sticker label, and here it has the, you know, item in question. There's the friulmodel logo, which is that eagle. We have here a picture of the real unit. This is something Fruity always tends to do. In this case, it's the B4 Howitzer. We have here a nice little drawing of the track link. This is model number ATL-109. And here we have just some info talking about what's, you know, in the set. And that's basically it. On the back here, we have a nice little warning label saying that the items are made out of lead and, you know, to use caution, keep away from children, for reasons that should be fairly obvious. So the boxes are just, you know, side opening tabs like this. If anyone's ever seen my other TrackLink videos, I mentioned Fruity a few times, and it's basically the same type of ordeal. So here we have the track links supplied with the set. So first out of the way, we have a coil of brass wire to be used as the hinge to, you know, to actually connect all the track links together. Here we have, what's interesting though, is a set of sprockets. Generally, when you buy Fruity tracks, they do not come with their own sprockets, so that the fact that they gave you these is something that is noteworthy. The sprockets, I could tell, are a bit more detailed compared to the ones that were supplied with the Trumpeter kit, and you'll see that, you know, as the video goes on. But obviously you have enough here for 2 sets of sprockets, you know, for the left and right hand pontoon found on the B4. And the last baggie over here consists of the actual track links themselves. Pouring out the tracks onto the table. The B4 is just a single type hinge track, i.e. it's not like a T34 or a Stalin where the center guide tooth is staggered between every other link. On the B4 here, it's just, you know, every link is all you need. Kind of like a Churchill or a Matilda, something along those lines. But here you can see the tracks in question. As you see, they're already starting to plug together, which is great. But here you can see the track link up close. Hopefully that camera zooms in. So with the camera zoomed in, you get to see the inner track detailing found. I like how it has the wing areas with the rigidity ribs integrally molded in. The tooth there is the appropriate shape, and you can see the remainder of the hinge detailing. If I flip this guy around, you get to see the face detailing in better light, or hopefully with this lighting situation that I have. But as you can see, it's, you know, what you see is what you get. The hinges themselves appear to be molded hollow. This is something that's always relevant to point out in Fruities. The hinges, by default, are pre-drilled, or I should say are molded in this type of format. However, it's not uncommon to have a little bit of crud molded into the hinge area over there. It's just a little bit of flash. It's nothing to be concerned about. However, it is generally something that needs to be contended by the builder when they're going through a building operation. And on some tracks, they're better than others. This is one of those things where it's, you know, the luck of the draw. I've built Fruities where on the one, it was the one I got on video for the Nashorn, or I'm sorry, for the Hummel, where the links were perfect. I didn't have any sort of blockages whatsoever to mess around with. However, I've had other ones in the past where I've needed to drill out the little sections there, cleaning out the flash in order for the things to properly get pinned in place. So again, it's at the luck of the draw. We'll see how that pans out with this one over here. For tools, well, you know, it's going to be pretty much straightforward. You're going to need a pair of thin needle nose pliers, a wire clipper. Because of the propensity to remove any blockages is quite common on these Fruity model links, a pin vise is going to be your best friend. You do not want to use a dremel for this. A pin vise is the best way to go. And as for the bit in question, I always tend to use the number 72 drill bit that we have right over here, which is a 0.0250 inch drill bit. Sorry for my metric fans out there. I have no idea what that translates to outside of Burgerland numbers. But for acquiring these bits here, I purchased them from the vendor, which you can see right here listed in the bottom portion of the screen, as well as also a direct link can be found in the video description. This is the vendor that I use for all of my micro bits, and these ones here are generally always in stock. Whenever I purchase them, if you go on the website, you're going to see that he sells these in a value pack where you have about 3 or 4 different sizes. And although that's great to get someone off the ground, if you build as many models as I do, you know exactly which bits you want. So I just custom order them through him. I just send him an email saying I need, 50 or 100 of X size, and he will custom tailor the order just for me. Matter of fact, here I have the box right over here that has 50, which is one of these boxes, filled of just the number 72 bits that I just referenced. They come in this nice little box, little snap cracked off. But regardless, here you can see what they look like, all brand new. It looks very, very pretty, and obviously, they tend to break as time goes on and as, you use them. So the more bits you have, the better in this case. And I'm pretty sure I may shred 1 or 2 during the operation, but, we'll see how that pans out. With the frailness of these bits, it's not uncommon for you to lose 1 or 2 during the course of a build. Something else that I like to use is just some super glue right over here. This is just used to help keep the wire in its place and prevent it from walking out during the course of construction, and also during the course of, fitting to the vehicle, or in this case, the howitzer. As for the super glue itself, this is the thick stuff. This is the stuff that it's my de facto glue, and I use it for basically everything from small scale models to my large scale models, and even my radio controlled armor techs. This is my go-to adhesive. So after about an hour or so, I was able to get the one track here fully assembled and even timed and fitted to the pontoon. One thing about these tracks is that they go together ridiculously quick, which is fantastic news specifically for the end user. Probably the only thing that will add any sort of time delay is just the prep work, which will include cutting all of the little pieces of brass wire to the appropriate length, and also drilling out the little holes found on the track pins, or I should say on the links themselves, which I'll show momentarily. The other thing I want to mention is with the sprocket itself. As you can see, the sprocket on the unit over here is the one that was supplied with the friulmodel set. And this was something that I actually had to revise on the pontoon. Right now, this pontoon here is still stock with the out-of-the-box configuration. And if you assemble it, you're going to have to remove this kit one in order to put the new friuli one in place because the two are not compatible. So before I do anything, I'm actually going to go ahead and assemble the sprocket. So here goes the sprocket. It is a 2-piece assembly, and it's just a simple assembly in that. So you just have these 3 little holes over here, and there's 3 corresponding pegs found on the reverse side. One thing that's nice is that the pegs are not reversible, so there's only one way that this unit can go together, which is very important, specifically because if you index the unit properly, the timing is going to work with the track, which is something that's very, very important, specifically for a sprocket. So I'm just going to go ahead and use some super glue over here and just put some drops of glue onto these locations over here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and find the correct lineup point and then get the sprockets just assembled appropriately. Once the unit plugs into itself, you can see why the sprocket has this very unique shape. The teeth have this S pattern to them, which is more than likely done just to prevent the track from sliding off during the unit being towed. It's actually a very clever design. It's one that I haven't seen done before on any sort of a tank or other tracked vehicle, so it's very interesting in that regard. Also, I also like the rigidity strips found on the inside. So, as for the kit sprocket over here, like I stated, this one's already been assembled, and this is the type of thing where you cannot do when this is fitted to the remainder of the B4. So if that's the case, your life is going to be a little bit more problematic. Anyway, in order to get the stock sprocket out, I'm just going to go ahead and go in here with this plier and use it as a wedge, just so that I could pry open the stock unit and get the sprocket out, which, as you can see, it quickly does. Once the stock sprocket is removed, we can compare it to the friuli one. And as you can see, it is very, very different, and the friuli one is better in basically every metric. Now, for this one here, I went ahead and temporarily installed the sprocket, but this was done just so I could get the correct track count. For this one over here, I'm not going to install it at this time, and this is going to be because both of these need to be primed and painted with the base coat and then refitted it or remounted in place. Clearly, this is something that's best done because once this unit is fitted in place, you're not going to be able to get thorough access to paint and get the primer onto these sections over here, so it's best done before the unit is fitted in place. As for this one, when the unit goes into paint, I'm going to go ahead and remove the sprocket again, just so that I could go ahead and thoroughly prime and paint it, like I mentioned before. But I will show the reassembly, or I should say the reinstallation of this, as the video continues. One other thing I want to mention about the tension is that I had the unit over here with one extra track link, and it was far too loose. It was way too saggy. If this is something that appeals to you, okay. But from what I've seen from photographs of these things, when the tension is properly set with the front idler over here, it would have the condition that we see presently. And yes, the unit is fully functional, as you can see here, which is pretty cool. Not that anyone's going to be playing with these things, but, you know, it is an interesting thing that these workable tracks do have. Okay, so at the moment, I have this sewing pin over here just to act as a master pin. And that was done just so I could adjust the track tension. With the pin removed, you can see the track now at its full length. Now that I have one full track laid out, this is going to really cut down the guesswork on the amount of links required to outfit one of these sections here. Whenever you're doing any sort of tank with workable tracks in any scale, be it 135 or even one of my 1/6 scale armor techs, the most amount of work is actually getting the first one laid up, because you're kind of guessing and you're test fitting constantly to see where the tension is going to be set at. But once you have one of the track bands done, the next one will probably be assembled in about half the time. So that's one thing that's interesting to point out about working with any type of tank that has workable track. So with those guys all off the table, here we have a bunch of links presently. These links here have all been pre-prepped and have been drilled out. I'm going to go ahead and grab a couple fresh track links from the table over here and put them down. So as I mentioned before, on these tracks here, it's really best to thoroughly drill them out. The reason why this is important is because not so much for the alignment, that actually can be assembled with one of the sections over here plugged up. The reason why I found it's best to drill them out is because it makes cutting the pins much easier compared to trying to guess exactly how short to make them to offset the clunk found into the one hinge section. So it's one of those things where you just want to just, you know, burn through it. And fortunately, it's really easily done with that drill bit that I touched upon before. I'm just going to go in here with the pin vise and just carefully, just lightly drill them out. With the longer one, you want to do one side and then the other side. You want to be careful, take your time. If you break a bit, fear not, this is something that can happen. And actually, this is probably my third drill bit over here. The bits eventually do get dull, and when they snap, no big deal, just throw it in the garbage. And with a plier, you can go ahead and basically pull out the busted drill bit that's now stuck in the hinge. And then, you know, just replace it with a fresh one, which is why I recommend getting the big box of drill bits that I touched upon before. But once the bit is, or I should say once the link is drilled out, you're all set to just go on to the next one. As you can see, they drill out in practically no time. The metal is very soft, and, you know, just a few seconds with your fingers over here, and the holes are properly drilled out. So I'm going to do this in real time, or when I edit, it's all going to be in real time, just so you see exactly the actual time it takes to drill these things out. So there you go. About less than a minute per link. Not too bad. So you want to just rinse, wash, and repeat this to a large number of links. So finally, when you have a decent pile over here, you can go on to the next step, which is actually, I'm going to go ahead and drill out more of the track links. It's just a handful left on the table. And then we'll go ahead and circle back to when I'm ready to start cutting the metal pins. And after a number of moments, here we have all of the track links required to outfit one single band, all drilled out and are ready for assembly. In this pile here, there are 36 links, as this is the exact number of links that are found on this link that I assembled earlier. Before I can start assembling, now I need to go ahead and cut out the pins, which of course is done with this brass wire that we have right over here, and also a clipper. This is one of those things where if you have a really sharp clipper, it will make the job go by a lot easier. And also for cutting out the pins, it doesn't have to be exact. I mean, you can technically make it exact and it'll take just a little bit longer, but you can just basically eyeball it. What I like to do is I like to just line it up here with the link, just from length to length. This is the long side of the link as opposed to the short side, which we can see right over here with those two hinge sections. So you just want to just briefly line it up and just cut accordingly. It's a bit tricky to get on camera, but I was able to rock it right through this earlier without any sort of complications. Obviously, you're going to need 36 of these, technically 37, but it's always good to have, a few more as extra because, you could drop one, you could bend one during installation. There's just a multitude of potential issues that can happen during the course of production. So it's always best to it's always best to have, extras lying around. And since the wire is supplied, you might as well go to town with it. Also, one other thing I want to mention is that all the tracks you see here on the table are not the entire set of links that are supplied with the model. There's about a decent number of them that are still left as spares, which is awesome. And by the way, as for any track links that are like this, not formed right or not casted right, on this set over here, that doesn't seem to be the case. Every track link seems to be really, really good. There was only one that had a slight deformality to it, and it was on one of these wings over here where it wasn't fully molded properly or fully casted properly, so obviously that one wasn't used for the set, and I just used the other ones in the lot. So far from what I can see here, the tracks on this particular example are actually really good, so there's not really any problems of any track links that are not properly casted right. However, I have had a situation where there weren't enough links supplied. It wasn't with this model. It's with, I believe, an Elephant that I did it was with the hybrid that I did a number of years ago. And in that situation, I just contacted Fruli, and they promptly sent a bag full of the replacement track links without any sort of problems. And they also threw in a few other extras. So, that's one thing I want to say. Their customer service is pretty good. So, if you are working on one of their sets and you run into a problem, just, send them a line and they should be able to help you out. And with the magic of editing, here we have all of the pins cut to shape, which is enough to do the length and then some. So at this point, we're ready to start pinning everything together. So I just have two of the links right here and here. Basically, just want to index them accordingly, which is easily done. There's only one way the links can be plugged in place. At that point there, you just take a little pin, put it into the little hole where it needs to go, and you just basically insert it. Before I insert all the way, I leave a little bit sticking out because at this point here, I'm just going to take a little drop of super glue, add it right over there, and then I could just install the pin fully. The super glue basically just, once it sets, it prevents the pin from walking out, which is something that may sound funny because, it's not like this thing is radio controlled or it's going to be played with or anything. However, I have seen situations where when the pins are not glued in, even from just basic handling, they could walk out and fall out, which is not really beneficial. So a small little drop of glue is all that's required, and afterwards you can see that the piece is properly hinged. So from here, just keep on going. This is the part of the construction that speeds up really, really quickly. As I touched upon before, the most amount of work is just drilling everything out and cutting the pins to length. Once that's concluded, you're basically ready to go. The needle nose plier is good at preventing the pins from bending during installation. This is something that can happen. But when you have the plier over here, it gives it more extra support and it prevents it from bending at a point rather than being inserted into where it needs to go. This one appears to be a little stiff. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and run the pin vise through one more time. By the way, if the pin vise cracks when you're doing that, you now have a pin on the inside. So that is something that has happened in the past. And there you have it. So, no point getting the remainder of the construction on camera at this time. Let's go ahead and cut across to when both of these tracks are ready for painting. So with both of the tracks all done, it's now time to reinstall the sprockets. As I touched upon before, the sprockets that are supplied with the kit cannot be utilized with this track and need to be swapped out with the kit ones. Here we have the kit ones here, now fully primed and painted. As for the paint that I used on these, I'm going to be touching upon that in more depth in the model showcase video, but it's basically Mission Models Russian green, and it was applied with the airbrush. So, with these pieces now fully painted, it's time for reinstallation. Hopefully, with a little luck, I'll be able to get this one in focus and also on screen. So, one thing to point out that this one, the pontoon bust set, seems a little bit more compared to the other, so it should be for an easier install. So the sprocket just gets lined up, drops into place, and then voila, it's installed. And at this point here, I'm going to do the little bit of glue, touch it up with the bodywork, and then this guy here could slide off into paint. One other thing I want to mention, the sprockets are reversible, so there is no thread direction, or at least that's what I was able to ascertain from looking at the real one. So just drop the piece in place and you're good to go. And after a few moments of work later, here we see the tracks fully painted and weathered and are also ready for installation. For the paintwork, because these tracks are made out of metal, this opens up the types of paints that can be used on them that you can't use on other types of tracks that are out there, i.e. if pieces are made out of single-piece vinyl or even polystyrene. As I often mention in my other videos where I'm utilizing tracks of a single-piece nature, I always stress do not utilize rattle can spray paints or even enamels on those type of tracks because they could potentially cause harm to the material. And a similar thing is also true for polystyrene. There are some higher-end paints out there, I should say rattle can spray paints out there that are great for other types of applications, but for plastic models, they tend to cause damage to the parts as opposed to being any benefit. But with these pieces being made out of metal, obviously the risk of any sort of melting or other type of chemical reactions is definitely not something that needs to be considered. So, for the paint, for the base coat, I went with Rust-Oleum Gray Primer. This is the same paint that I utilize on my metal workable track links that are found on my 116 radio controlled bills and also even on my 1/6 scale radio controlled armor techs. This color here does a fantastic job with replicating the parkerized or oxide coated finish that are found on these tank tracks. In contrast, we compare that to the single piece tracks where I roll with the Tamiya flat black or with my workable plastic tracks where I go with a El Cheapo flat black can of spray paint. Both of those need some extra steps on top of the base coat in order to get the color that we have here that this paint gives you straight out of the can. So that's a huge plus and benefit for rolling with metal workable track links as opposed to plastic ones. Again, only use this if the tracks are made out of metal. Because these are Friulis, this paint here cannot be recommended enough. Another benefit that the paint has when it gets added to the tracks is that it thoroughly seals the material. As I've touched upon in numerous times already, these tracks here are made out of a lead-based alloy, so they are a bit problematic with their medium. But once the tracks are painted thoroughly with the paint that we have here, it seals them off very, very well, and the lead contamination risk is much more mitigated. It's not totally eliminated, but it's much more sealed and it's much more contained compared to leaving the tracks in their el natural state. And as for the scratched, or I should say the weathered surfaces that we have here, this may look like the original metal, but it is not. This is just silver spray paint that was then dry brushed over these sections over here to give the distressed look. As for how I go ahead and paint this, well, I actually have a link in the video description to a tutorial video where I use the exact same painting techniques that I used over here on a white metal Browning M1919A4 MG, and that can be found again in the video description, and there you'll see basically from start to finish how I get the look. Just minus the airbrushing. I didn't do that to this one. I just took the pieces and just dry brushed them. So from here, we are now ready for installation. If I bring the tracks, or I should say the pontoons, onto the table, at this point here, these are fully painted and weathered and are ready for their track installation. So the first thing I am going to do is with the pin vise, I'm just going to go ahead and just make sure that the pinholes are nice and cleared out. Because the tracks are painted, a lot of times paint can flow into these areas over here, clunking them up, which will make the installation of the final pin a bit more problematic. So just, you know, it's good practice to do this right before you go ahead and try to loop it around the model. This is done to both tracks, so at this point here, I'm ready for the install. I already pre-clipped the wires, and that's done off camera. It's currently, and they are sitting off camera at the moment. So from this point here, I'm actually now ready. The tracks themselves are a omnidirectional track in that there's no track direction, nothing like chevrons or any other types of features to worry about. You just basically just take the track and just lay it on. So I'm just going to go ahead and index it accordingly. Like we saw before, the timing is really good around the kit's sprocket. And we're just basically going to go ahead and just connect the two hinge sections together, like so. At this point here, I'm just going to take the piece of wire, carefully just hinge it into place. After a little bit of fiddling, the pin should eventually find its sweet spot, and then when you get to that special point, small little drop of glue, and then the pin gets seated fully. It may take a couple attempts to get the piece just right. It just depends on the luck of the hinge pins. If you are inserting the wire and the wire bends on you, just don't worry about it. Pull it out and then snip a new piece of wire, and then you could just, you know, rinse, wash, and repeat. But here you go. You can see what the piece looks like, fully painted. And yes, it even does roll, which is pretty cool. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same steps with the other one, and then we'll just go ahead and get back to when both of these pontoons have their tracks on them. Once you have the pontoons fully tracked, it's then time to go ahead and secure them to the model. As I mentioned repeatedly, I cannot stress this enough, if you are going to be installing the tracks on this kit over here, this is 100% best done before the installation of these pieces to the vehicle, or in this case to the artillery piece. This is a very frail bit of, you know, modeling equipment over here, and if you go ahead and try to manhandle it like I was before with trying to, you know, make sure the tracks are seated and all that, yet alone trying to change out the sprockets, you're going to be in for a bit more of a difficult time. So that's why I cannot, again, stress enough to do this with the pontoons off of the model. Once the things are fully tracked, though, at this point here, it is time for installation. So I'm just going to add some glue here to the appropriate locations. And I'm going to install the units. Remember, don't screw this up. You want to have the correct component on the right side. You can easily have the part installed in reverse. And if you do, yeah, that's not good. So the way it works on these B4 Howitzers is that the sprocket is in the back and the large idler here is in the front, much along the lines of a KV. Actually, it's very similar to a KV suspension in many respects. So with that out of the way, I'm just going to go ahead and install this guy right here where it needs to go. Same thing with the one on the opposite side. Just like so. The other thing that's cool about the Trumpeter kit is that if you build the kit accordingly, the pontoons are not on that large center shaft, are not glued, or I should say the shaft is not glued to the frame of the howitzer, and because of this, you'll actually have a somewhat form-fitting suspension, as you can see right here. So that's something else to point out. And the entire chassis of this thing can freely pivot, which is great specifically if you're trying to put this on a diorama type setting. But that's something I'm going to be mentioning in more depth in the actual model showcase video for this artillery piece. So once the pontoons are in place, I'm just going to go ahead and let the super glue set. And oh, another thing about, or I should say another advantage about this is that at this point here, this model is going to be thoroughly coated with the VMS matte varnish. This is generally something that I do on my models at the very end, before the tracks are installed, because I don't like getting the varnish onto the single piece vinyl tracks, you know, for similar reasons about the enamels. I just don't trust the varnish long-term on the tracks. It could potentially cause problems, and just to play it safe, I tend not to varnish my single piece vinyls. But with these pieces over here, that's not the case. I can just go ahead and throw varnish on top of it and call it a day. Also, the varnish will have a secondary effect with adding as another barrier to protect the lead material from the surrounding environment. So it does have another benefit besides the ones I just mentioned. And here's the model now fully completed. And as you can see, the Friuli tracks look absolutely excellent on the B4 Howitzer that we have here. So some final thoughts that I have on these tracks before going ahead and wrap up this video is that Friuli track links, by and large, are always an excellent addition to add to your model, specifically if you have the opportunity and the budget to do so. They are a luxury item, specifically, but if you are going to utilize them on your build, they will prove out to be an excellent investment, and the end results are always something that looks spectacular. For this particular build over here, specifically, the Friuli links, in my opinion, are not an optional thing. They are a must-have bit of equipment. As I mentioned before, the stock tracks are complete junk on the Trumpeter kit, and the same is also true for the Allen one for that matter. But regardless, the addition of the Friuli tracks here just make the model look 100 times better. I cannot recommend these tracks links enough, specifically for the B4 Howitzer. Something else I want to mention is that of all of the workable track links that I've assembled in the past from different companies and also for different types of vehicles, I gotta say that for this particular unit over here, the track assembly was probably the fastest and the most problem-free I've ever had to undertake. These tracks went together with hardly any sort of extra elbow grease. The design of the link basically lent itself to this in comparison to, say, the Dragon Hummel that I recently completed, where I did a track link tutorial on, or also the AFV Club patent tracks that I did another tutorial on. Those tracks are a little bit more complex in terms of prepping and assembly compared to these ones over here. The B4 track link is a very simple track link. It's just a, you know, just a simple hinge type affair. And also, unlike the Hummel, where that had a simple track link too, that one required a much longer track span compared to the one here in the B4. The shorter overall length in combination to that simple track hinge design lends itself for a very quick and easy assembly. To also add to the simplicity, paintwork on these tracks are definitely something to mention. Unlike an American track link that has, you know, components made out of steel and rubber, and because of that you will have different materials to paint and weather in different formats. For this one here, it's just an all steel dead link. So because of that, painting and weathering is much more simplified compared to the one that I mentioned before. One final thing I do want to mention about the track is with the number of links. As I mentioned before, I used 36 links, but I did try with 37. And when I did, the track was much more saggier in the middle section over here, which is something that some people may find appealing to their model. However, in my opinion, and after looking at many pictures of the real ones, this is how the tension would be set on the actual unit. And if you have it where it's overly floppy, it just looks too much in my opinion. And also in real life, you would probably throw the track when you're, you know, lugging this thing around. So, in my opinion, 36 links is the best way to go. If you had 37, yeah, you are going to get a little bit more sag in this section over here, but in my opinion, it's just going to be overly done. So that is something to consider for anyone that's, you know, wondering about the track count on each of these track pontoons. And with that, that wraps up this 1/35 scale track link tutorial video for the Friuli model B4 Howitzer workable track link sets. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being other 1/35 scale workable track link tutorial videos like this one over here, or the other smaller scale model showcase videos and larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop with new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other builds that are seen on this channel in both small and in large scale. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.